some lessons can only be learned in the cold. My son-in-law, Ryan, a man born into the kind of warmth that only old money can provide, learned his most important lesson on Christmas Eve. He learned it standing on the porch of a house he thought was his, watching his entire world get packed into a moving truck, with nothing but the designer shirt on his back and the slow, creeping realization of his own spectacular failure. My name is Catherine Miller, but everyone who ever mattered to me just calls me Kate. The story I'm about to tell you is about a mother's love, a promise broken, and a cold, quiet revenge that was months in the making. If you believe that justice is a dish that is not only best served cold, but is planned in silence and executed with precision, then subscribe to this channel and settle in. You'll want to hear how this ends. Part 1: The Unraveling of a Promise. It all started with a promise. Not one made to me, but one I overheard. It was the day of my daughter Lily's wedding. My husband, David, had been gone for 3 years by then, and standing there alone, watching my only child get married felt like standing on a cliff with the wind at my back. Lily was my entire world, the living, breathing embodiment of the love David and I had shared. She had his gentle eyes and my stubborn chin. She was radiant that day, a wildflower in a meticulously curated garden. Ryan's family, the Prestons, were the gardeners. They were hedge fund money, generations of it, the kind of people whose politeness is a weapon. His mother, Eleanor, was the matriarch, a woman sculpted from ice and disapproval. I remember her gliding over to me during the reception, her diamond necklace catching the light. She appraised my simple navy dress with a glance that could curdle milk. "Catherine," she'd said, her voice smooth as silk but with the texture of sandpaper. "You must be so relieved that Lily has found someone like Ryan to take care of her." It wasn't a compliment. It was a thinly veiled insult about our life, our home, the world David and I had built. We weren't poor, not by a long shot. David was a master carpenter, a man who built beautiful, sturdy things with his hands. Our home was filled with the smell of sawdust and varnish and love. It was a life of substance, not of status. To the Prestons, that was the same as being destitute. Lily, sweet, optimistic Lily, saw none of this. She saw Ryan. And to be fair, in the beginning, Ryan seemed decent enough. He looked at Lily like she was the sun, and for a time, I think he truly believed it. The promise I overheard was when he was dancing with her, his hand on the small of her back. He leaned in and whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I'll never let them hurt you. I'll always protect you. It's you and me against the world." I held on to that promise. I had to. Because as the months turned into a year, then 2, I saw the Preston family's casual cruelty begin to chip away at my daughter's light. It was never one big thing. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. It was Eleanor, helpfully, suggesting a better tailor because Lily's clothes were charming, but not quite right for a Preston. It was Ryan's father, a bulldog of a man named Richard, making a joke at a family dinner about Lily's degree in literature being a wonderful hobby. It was Ryan's sister, Chloe, laughing a little too loudly when Lily mispronounced the name of a French wine. And Ryan, the protector, was silent. He'd offer a weak smile, squeeze Lily's hand under the table, and say nothing. He was a boy playing at being a man, terrified of being cut off from the family fortune that defined him. His love for Lily was real, I suppose, but it was a sapling in the shadow of a century-old oak. It couldn't grow. I would see the aftermath during our weekly coffee dates. At first, Lily would brush it off. "Oh, Mom, that's just how they are. They don't mean anything by it." But slowly, I saw the changes. She started dressing differently, in muted, expensive colors that weren't her. She stopped talking about the children's book she was trying to write. The vibrant, joyful girl I knew was being replaced by a careful, quiet woman who was constantly trying to be smaller, to take up less space, to be less herself. My heart ached with a low, constant hum of anxiety. I'd lie awake at night, the silence of my empty house amplifying my fears. I'd think of David and what he would do. He would have seen right through them. He would have pulled Ryan aside, man to man, and laid down the law. But I was alone in this, and my only weapon was a mother's intuition. The first real crack in the facade appeared about 6 months before that fateful Christmas. Ryan had started his own investment venture, a desperate attempt to prove himself to his father. He poured his trust fund into it, and from what little Lily told me, it was a disaster. The phone calls at their house became more frequent, the whispers more frantic. Ryan, who had always had the easy confidence of a man who had never known a day of real struggle, was now perpetually tense, a wire pulled taut. Lily tried to support him, of course. She'd make his favorite meals, listen for hours as he paced and muttered about markets and margins. But the stress made him cruel. He started to echo his family's criticisms. "Do you have to be so cheerful all the time, Lily? It's grating," he'd snap. Or, "My mother's right, you really don't understand the kind of pressure I'm under." Each word was another cut, and this time, the blade was held by the man who had promised to be her shield. I tried to talk to her. "Sweetheart," I said one afternoon over lukewarm coffee, my hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. "Are you happy?" Her eyes welled up instantly, and that was all the answer I needed. She quickly blinked the tears away. "Of course, Mom. It's just a stressful time. Ryan's business, it's a lot." She was defending him. The classic, heartbreaking defense of a woman who believes love is supposed to hurt sometimes. That was when the seed of my own plan was planted. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not yet. It was a plan for protection. A safety net. I started paying closer attention. I have a friend, Sarah, who works in real estate law. Over lunch one day, I casually asked her about the Prestons, about Ryan's business. It's a small town when you move in certain circles. It took her less than a week to get back to me. The news was worse than I thought. Ryan wasn't just failing, he was drowning. He'd taken out a second mortgage on the beautiful home his parents had gifted them as a wedding present. He'd leveraged everything. The bank, she said, was getting impatient. Foreclosure wasn't just a possibility, it was imminent. My blood ran cold. The thought of my daughter, who had given up her own small apartment, her independence, for this life, being thrown out onto the street, it was unbearable. Ryan would never tell her, of course. Not until the marshals were at the door. His pride wouldn't allow it. He would let them both sink before he admitted he had failed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my quiet living room, a photo of David on the mantelpiece, and I made a decision. I had the money. David had been a careful man, and his life insurance policy was substantial. I had invested it wisely, and it had grown. I wasn't a Preston, but I wasn't helpless. The next morning, I called Sarah. "I want to buy the debt," I told her, my voice steady, even though my hands were shaking. "I want to buy the house. Anonymously. Through a holding company. Whatever it takes. I don't want them to know." It was a complicated process. It took weeks of paperwork, of lawyers and LLCs with impenetrable names. I signed documents that made my head spin. I wired a sum of money that made my stomach clench. But when it was done, it was done. The deed to my daughter's home, the roof over her head, was mine. It sat in a safe deposit box at my local bank, a secret shield she knew nothing about. I told myself it was just an insurance policy. Just in case, that I prayed I would never have to cash in. I hoped Ryan's business would recover. I hoped he would remember the man he was on his wedding day. I hoped my daughter would be safe and happy, and that the documents would gather dust in that metal box forever. Hope, would soon learn, is not a strategy. The months leading up to that Christmas were the worst. Ryan's venture collapsed entirely. He was broken, but his pride was intact. He and his family closed ranks, creating a seamless facade of wealth and success. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside that house, the chill had set in. Lily became more and more isolated. She'd call me less, her voice strained. They were making her feel like the failure was somehow her fault. She wasn't supportive enough, not understanding enough, not from the right kind of stock to handle a crisis. Then came the invitation for Christmas Eve dinner at their house. Eleanor had called Lily to announce it, not invite her. "We'll be having a small, intimate dinner. Just family," she'd said, the unspoken implication hanging in the air. "You are not one of us." Still, Lily was determined to make it work. She spent days picking out the perfect gift for each of them, thoughtful, personal things that I knew would be met with polite, dismissive smiles. She bought a new dress, simple, elegant, and probably more than she should have spent. She was trying so hard. That Christmas Eve, a heavy snow began to fall. The kind of wet, thick snow that clings to branches and makes the world silent. I was at my own home, the fire crackling, a cup of tea in my hands. I had a small spread of food prepared for myself for later. I was lonely, but peaceful. I kept looking at the clock, wondering how Lily was doing. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Around 7, I decided I couldn't stand it. It was Christmas Eve. I wanted to see my daughter. I packed up the gifts I had for her and Ryan, a first edition of her favorite book for Lily, a beautiful handcrafted watch box from David's old workshop for Ryan. I told myself I was just dropping them off. A surprise. I pulled on my heavy winter coat, my boots, and my gloves, and stepped out into the swirling snow. The drive was treacherous. The roads were slick with ice, the visibility poor. It took me nearly 45 minutes to make a 20-minute drive. My old car skidded twice, and my heart leaped into my throat each time. But I kept going, propelled by that maternal instinct, that deep, primal need to know my child was okay. When I finally turned onto their long, winding driveway, the house was lit up like a Christmas card. Golden lights spilled from every window onto the pristine white snow. A wreath with a big red bow hung on the dark oak door. Through the large picture window in the living room, I could see the whole family. They were gathered around the towering Christmas tree, champagne flutes in their hands. I saw Eleanor, regal and smiling. I saw Richard, laughing, his face ruddy. I saw Chloe, preening and gesturing with her glass. I saw Ryan, standing among them, a strained smile on his face, playing the part of the dutiful son. They were all there, a perfect portrait of holiday cheer. But the portrait was incomplete. Someone was missing. My eyes scanned the property, my headlights cutting through the falling snow. And then I saw her. My blood didn't just run cold. It froze solid in my veins. There, on the bottom step of the grand stone porch, was Lily. She was sitting on the freezing stone, hunched into a small ball, wrapped only in that thin dress she had been so excited about. Her shoulders were trembling violently, not just from the cold, but from sobbing. The snow had melted into her hair, and her cheeks were a raw, angry red. She was staring at nothing, her breath misting in the frigid air, a ghost at her own feast. I put the car in park, but I didn't turn it off. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The scene in front of me was so monstrous, so utterly barbaric, that my mind couldn't process it. Through the window, the sound of their laughter was a faint murmur. Inside, warmth and light and celebration. Outside, my daughter. Alone. In the snow. My body finally caught up with my brain. A rage so pure and so potent it felt like swallowing fire surged through me. I threw the car door open and stumbled out into the snow, my boots sinking deep. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel anything but the thundering in my ears. "Lily?" I called out, my voice hoarse. Her head snapped up. Her eyes, swollen and red-rimmed, widened when she saw me. A broken sound escaped her lips. "Mom." She whispered, the word dissolving into a sob. I was at her side in an instant, falling to my knees in the snow in front of her. I touched her cheek. It was like ice. "My God, Lily. What happened? What are you doing out here?" She couldn't stop shivering. Her teeth were chattering. They said. She swallowed hard, another wave of tears spilling down her frozen cheeks. Eleanor said the caterers had taken up too much space in the kitchen, and they had to add another leaf to the table, and there wasn't enough room. I stared at her, uncomprehending. Not enough room? What are you talking about? For me, she choked out, her voice barely audible. She said there wasn't enough room at the table for me. She told me I should wait outside until dinner was over. She said they'd call me in for dessert. I looked from her shattered face to the bright, warm window. I saw them lifting their glasses for a toast. I saw Ryan, my daughter's husband, the man who had promised to protect her, raising his glass with them. He knew. He knew his wife was sitting outside in a snowstorm, and he was doing nothing. The rage inside me solidified. It turned from a hot, burning fire into a cold, hard diamond of purpose. I had my answer. The just in case had arrived. The insurance policy was about to be cashed. I didn't say anything at first. I took off my heavy winter coat, the one David had given me for our last Christmas together, and I wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. She sagged into me, all the fight gone out of her. I pulled her to her feet. "Come with me, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft, but with an undercurrent of steel she had never heard before. "We're going home." She just nodded, too broken to argue. I guided her to my car, settled her into the passenger seat, and cranked the heat up as high as it would go. Her body was racked with shivers, her gaze distant and hollow. I closed her door and turned back to the house. I was not done here. Oh no. I was just getting started. I walked past Lily's car, past Ryan's ostentatious SUV, and I didn't stop until I was standing right in front of that big oak door with the festive red bow. My hand reached for the cold brass handle. I didn't knock. I had the key, of course, but using it felt too subtle for the moment. No, I was done being subtle. I was done being polite. I just turned the handle, pushed the door open, and walked inside. The warmth of the house hit me like a physical blow, carrying the scent of roasted pine and expensive perfume. And just like that, the laughter and the music died. The room went utterly, completely silent. Part 2, the cold, hard truth. Every single face in that room turned towards me. 12 pairs of eyes, a jury of the smug and the privileged, all fixed on the middle-aged woman in a simple sweater and snow-dusted boots standing in their grand entryway. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. You could have heard a snowflake land on the marble floor. It was Eleanor, of course, who broke it first. She set her champagne flute down with a sharp clink, a perfectly manicured eyebrow arched in disdain. "Catherine," she sneered, her voice dripping with venomous civility. "What on earth are you doing? You can't just barge in here. This is a private party." I ignored her. I ignored all of them. My eyes found Ryan across the room. He was standing by the fireplace, his face pale, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. He looked like a startled child, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. The rest of his family were just statues in the background, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. I took a slow step into the room, my gaze locked on his. The heat from the roaring fire felt like a mockery. I let the cold air from the open door wash in behind me, a silent testament to where my daughter had just been. "Where is Lily?" Ryan finally managed to stammer, his eyes flicking nervously towards the door, as if he expected her to be standing behind me. "She's in my car," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She was cold. A flicker of something, shame, perhaps, or just fear of being caught, crossed his face. He opened his mouth to make an excuse, to spin a lie, but I didn't give him the chance. I held his gaze, and I delivered the 5 words that had been sitting in my safe deposit box for 6 months. 5 words that would detonate his entire world. "You don't own this house." The words just hung there in the opulent, silent room. They didn't make sense to them. Richard, Ryan's father, let out a short, barking laugh. "What kind of nonsense is that? Of course he owns the house. I bought it for him myself." "You bought it for him, yes," I agreed, my voice still level. But you didn't keep paying for it. Ryan's business, his little gamble, it didn't just cost him his trust fund. It cost him this house, too. He defaulted on the second mortgage months ago. The bank was ready to foreclose. Ryan went from pale to ghostly white. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at his father, then at his mother, his eyes wide with panic. The protector had been exposed as a fraud in front of the very people he so desperately wanted to impress. Eleanor stepped forward, her face a mask of fury. This is absurd. You're lying. You're a bitter, jealous woman, and you're trying to ruin our Christmas. Am I? I reached into my purse. My hand was perfectly steady. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. I had brought it with me, not knowing if I'd need it, but feeling in my bones that the night would call for it. I walked past their ornate dining table, the one that didn't have room for my daughter, and I stopped right in front of Ryan. I tossed the envelope onto the polished mahogany surface. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Those are the papers, I said, my voice clear and ringing now. The deed. The title. All of it. In the name of a holding company that I own. I bought the debt 6 months ago. I own the roof over your head. I own the floorboards you're standing on. I own the door you're going to walk out of. Ryan stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. He wouldn't touch it. It was his father, Richard, who snatched it up. He ripped it open, his thick fingers fumbling with the clasp. He pulled out the documents, his eyes scanning them, his face growing darker with every line he read. The legal jargon, the signatures, the official seals. It was all there. It was all real. He looked from the papers to me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and impotent rage. You can't do this, he growled, his bravado crumbling. I can, I said simply. And I have. I turned my attention back to Ryan. He was trembling now, his facade completely shattered. You made a promise, I said, my voice dropping lower, for his ears only. You promised you would protect her. You promised it would be you and her against the world. But when it came down to it, you chose them. You chose this. You left her outside in the snow because you were too much of a coward to stand up to your mother. Tears started to well in his eyes. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. I was going to let her in, he stammered. It was just for a few minutes. Mother she was angry about the seating. Stop, I cut him off, my voice like a whip. Just stop talking. You're not sorry you hurt her. You're sorry you got caught. I straightened up and looked around the room at all of them, at their stunned, hateful faces. The house is in my name, I announced to the room at large. And I'm rescinding your invitation. All of you. Pack your things. Pack his things, I said, gesturing to Ryan. You have until morning to be out. 8 a.m. At 8:01, I will be here with the sheriff to have you removed for trespassing. For a moment, there was only the sound of the fire crackling. Then, chaos erupted. Eleanor started screaming, calling me names I won't repeat. Richard was sputtering about lawyers and lawsuits. Chloe looked like she was about to faint. And Ryan? He just sank into a chair, his head in his hands, finally, utterly defeated. I didn't stay to watch. My part was done. I turned my back on them and walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The cold air felt clean, pure. I got back in my car, where Lily was huddled under my coat, the heat blasting. She looked at me, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning, fragile hope. What did you do, Mom? I fixed it, sweetheart, I said, putting the car in reverse. I just fixed it. The drive home was silent. Lily didn't ask any more questions. I think she was in shock. When we got back to my house, the house she grew up in, I led her inside. The warmth here was different. It was a gentle, welcoming warmth, not the oppressive heat of the Preston house. I made her a cup of tea with honey, sat her on the couch, and wrapped her in the afghan my own mother had knitted years ago. She finally broke down then. Not the shivering, desperate sobs from the porch, but deep, wrenching gulps of grief and relief. She cried for her broken heart, for her shattered illusions, for the 2 years she had spent trying to be someone she wasn't. And I just held her, stroking her hair, letting her cry it all out. My phone started buzzing around 10 p.m. It was Ryan. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. He switched to texting. "Kate, please, we need to talk. This is a huge misunderstanding. My mother is a difficult woman, you know that. I was trying to manage her. Lily, please pick up. I love you. Don't do this. Don't throw away our marriage over this." Then, the voicemail started. The first one was pleading. The second was angry. The third was desperate. I listened to that one. His voice was cracking. "Kate. Lily, please. My parents are going to kill me. I have nowhere to go. Everything is gone. You don't understand, you've ruined my life." My life? I almost laughed. He still didn't get it. He still thought he was the victim. He wasn't sorry for leaving his wife in the snow. He was sorry that there were consequences. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her face tear-streaked but peaceful for the first time in months. I turned my phone to silent and sat in the armchair across from her, watching her breathe. The house was quiet. The snow fell outside the window, blanketing the world in white. I felt no guilt. I felt no pity. All I felt was a profound, quiet sense of rightness. The safety net had been deployed. My daughter was safe. But I knew this was far from over. Evicting them was the act of revenge, but the war for my daughter's soul, for her self-worth, had just begun. Ryan and his family were not the type to go quietly. They would fight, they would manipulate, they would try to poison Lily's mind against me. They would try to make me the villain. And a small, terrifying part of me wondered if Lily, in the light of day, would believe them. The cliffhanger wasn't whether they would be out by morning, it was whether my daughter, after everything, would choose to walk back into the cold. Part 3, The Siege of Silence. The next morning was Christmas Day. It dawned crisp and painfully bright, the new snow glistening on every surface. It felt like the world had been scrubbed clean. I was up before the sun, making coffee, the rich aroma filling the quiet house. Lily was still asleep on the couch, looking younger than she had in years. For the first time, there were no tense lines around her mouth, no shadow of anxiety in her brow. She was just sleeping. The sight filled me with a fierce, protective love that was as solid and real as the mug in my hands. My phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, began to buzz again. It was Ryan. Then a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call. Eleanor. I silenced the ringer but didn't turn it off. I wanted a record of everything. At precisely 8:01 a.m., I called the local sheriff's department. I spoke to a deputy I knew vaguely from town, a calm man named Bill. I explained the situation simply and without emotion. I own the property at 14 Willow Creek Lane. I had tenants who were supposed to be vacated by 8 a.m. I believe they are still on the premises, and I'd like to request a civil standby while I ensure the property is secured. There was a pause on the other end. 14 Willow Creek? Isn't that the Preston place? It's my place now, Bill, I said. The paperwork is all in order. I told Lily what I was doing. She sat up, clutching the afghan around her. Her face was pale. Mom, a sheriff? Is that necessary? It is, I said gently but firmly. These are not people who respond to politeness, sweetheart. They only understand power and consequences. We are going to be calm, we are going to be firm, and we are not going to be emotional. Let me handle this. When the deputy's car and my own pulled into the long driveway an hour later, the scene was one of chaotic humiliation. A large moving truck was parked awkwardly on the lawn, its back ramped down. Two weary-looking movers were carrying out a ridiculously oversized gilded mirror. Eleanor was directing them, her voice sharp and brittle, her fur coat thrown hastily over what looked like silk pajamas. Richard was on his phone, pacing and yelling at what I assumed was his lawyer. And Ryan. Ryan was just standing there amidst boxes of his expensive, useless possessions, looking lost. When he saw my car, he started towards me, his face a mixture of desperation and anger. Deputy Bill got out of his car at the same time, and Ryan froze. The presence of the uniform changed the entire dynamic. "Kate, you can't do this," Ryan pleaded from a distance, his voice hoarse. "This is our home." "It was your home, Ryan," I said, getting out of my car and walking towards the porch. "Your lease expired this morning." I didn't look at him again. I walked up the steps, past a box of his golf trophies, and addressed Eleanor. "I trust you'll be finished soon," I said politely. "I've arranged for a locksmith to come at noon to change the locks." She shot me a look of pure hatred. "You will be hearing from our lawyers. You have no idea the mistake you've just made." "The only mistake," I replied, my voice even, "was thinking that common decency is something you can opt out of. Enjoy your Christmas." I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I just stood there, a silent supervisor, until the last box was loaded and the family was gathered by their luxury cars. They looked ridiculous, a portrait of disgraced wealth, huddled in the cold morning air. Before he got in his car, Ryan looked over at me one last time. His eyes were begging. He was looking for an ounce of pity, a crack in my resolve. He found none. I just stood there, solid as the oak tree in the front yard, until they drove away, leaving a trail of tire tracks in the perfect snow. Returning home should have felt like a complete victory, but the next few weeks were their own kind of battle. The Prestons, unable to fight me legally, because the law was entirely on my side, began a different kind of siege. A psychological one. It started with the phone calls to Lily. Ryan would call her, weeping, telling her how much he loved her, how it was all a misunderstanding, how his mother had forced him into it. He painted himself as a tragic hero, trapped between the two women he loved. "She's trying to poison you against me, Lily," he'd cry. "She's always been jealous of us." Then Eleanor would call. Her approach was different. She was all saccharine concern. "Lily, my dear, I am so worried about you. Your mother is clearly unstable. This action she's taken is so aggressive, so unhinged. I think you need to get away from her influence and think clearly." They were trying to frame me as the villain. The crazy, overbearing mother who had destroyed her daughter's marriage out of spite. They sent gifts to our house, bouquets of flowers, expensive gift baskets, all with notes begging Lily to come home. Not to their new, much smaller rented condo, but to the idea of the life they represented. And it started to work. Not because Lily believed them, not entirely, but because she was a good person with a soft heart. The constant barrage of guilt and manipulation wore her down. She would get off the phone looking exhausted and conflicted. "Maybe I should just talk to him, Mom," she said one evening, twisting a napkin in her hands. "Just to get closure. He sounds so broken. He sounds like a manipulative boy who is facing consequences for the first time in his life," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "He's not heartbroken, Lily. He's inconvenienced. But he's still my husband," she whispered, and my heart broke for her. This was the real battle. I had won the house, but I could lose my daughter. I knew I couldn't forbid her from talking to him. I couldn't lock her away. She had to see the truth for herself. The turning point, the moment the fog finally cleared for her, came about 2 weeks later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Lily had agreed, against my silent advice, to meet Ryan for coffee at a neutral, public place. She went looking nervous but determined. I stayed home, pacing my kitchen, feeling utterly powerless. An hour later, she came back. I knew the moment she walked in the door that something had changed. Her face wasn't sad or conflicted. It was calm. A cold, clear, furious calm. She sat down at the kitchen table and looked at me. "You were right," she said, her voice flat. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down opposite her. "He was charming at first," she began, staring at her hands. "He apologized for everything. He cried. He said all the right words. He said he was going to stand up to his mother, that he had already started looking for a smaller place just for the two of us. He was painting this beautiful picture of a new start, just him and me." She took a shaky breath. And I was starting to believe him. I was actually considering it. Then, he pulled a folder out of his briefcase. She looked up at me, and her eyes were shining with the clarity of a freshly shattered illusion. It was his business plan. A new one. He wanted me to give it to you. He wanted me to convince you to invest in his new venture. He said that with your financial backing, we could get everything back. He even suggested we could buy the house back from you, at a discount, as a family gesture. I just stared at her. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it. "He didn't want me back," Lily said, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He wanted a loan. He saw me as a bridge to your bank account. He sat there, crying about how much he missed me, while all he was thinking about was how to use me to get back his money." She finally saw it. She saw him not as the man she loved, but as the man he truly was, a hollow shell, a parasite dressed in a cashmere sweater. She saw that his promises were just tools, his love just another form of currency. That night, she called a lawyer friend of hers. The next day, she filed for divorce. The siege was over. The Prestons had fired their last, most desperate shot, and in doing so, had obliterated their own objective. Ryan's attempt to use Lily's love for him was the very thing that extinguished it forever. I sold the house a month later. I didn't want it. It was tainted. I got a good price for it, and I put the entire sum into a trust fund in Lily's name. It was her money, her independence, bought and paid for. The planning of my revenge had been a secret, a solo act born of desperation. But the fallout, the slow and painful process of untangling my daughter from that toxic family, was something we had to face together. The true victory wasn't watching them drive away in shame. It was sitting here, in my quiet kitchen, watching my daughter take the first step toward reclaiming her own life, finally understanding that some people don't deserve a seat at your table, let alone in your heart. The house was just a house. Getting my daughter back? That was everything. Part 4, a quiet kind of triumph. The execution of the revenge was a single, explosive moment on a cold Christmas Eve. The fallout was a slow, grinding war of attrition that lasted for weeks. But the true resolution, the final, satisfying click of the lock on that chapter of our lives, was a much quieter affair. It didn't happen in a lawyer's office or a courtroom. It happened on a sunny Saturday in April, 4 months after that night. The divorce was proceeding, an ugly, grasping affair on the Prestons' part. They contested everything, not because they had a legal leg to stand on, but because it was the only way they could continue to inflict pain. Ryan, in a final, pathetic act of spite, tried to claim that Lily had abandoned the marriage and that he was entitled to spousal support. The claim was so ludicrous it was laughed out of the preliminary hearing, but it showed his true colors in indelible ink. He wasn't just weak, he was venomous. Through it all, Lily held her head high. With every desperate, grasping motion from them, she grew stronger, more resolute. It was like she was shedding a skin, and the person emerging was brighter and more confident than the girl who had walked down the aisle. She started writing again, her laptop open on the kitchen table late into the night. She reconnected with old friends, her laughter once again filling my house. She was coming home to herself. I never spoke to the Prestons again. My lawyer handled everything. But I heard things. Small towns talk. Richard's reputation had taken a hit. The story, in its most basic, brutal form, had gotten out. A man who lets his son leave his wife on a freezing porch on Christmas Eve isn't just a bad father-in-law, he's a social pariah, even in circles that value money over morals. There are lines. Eleanor had apparently become a recluse, too humiliated to show her face at the country club, and Ryan. Ryan was a ghost. He had moved into a small, sterile apartment. Without the grand house and the endless river of family money, his charm had evaporated. He was just another failed businessman with expensive taste and a bad attitude. The friends who had once flocked to his parties and clapped him on the back now crossed the street to avoid him. He had learned his lesson in the cold, and the chill had followed him. The triumph, as I said, came in April. It was the first truly warm day of the year. The kind of day that feels like a promise. Lily came into the living room, a nervous energy about her. "Mom," she said, "I want to go for a drive." I knew where she wanted to go. We got in the car and drove, the windows down, the warm air smelling of damp earth and new leaves. We drove through town and into the wealthy enclave where she used to live. We turned onto Willow Creek Lane. A large "Sold" sign was staked into the front lawn of the house. A new family, a doctor with 2 young children, had bought it. As we drove past, we could see the kids in the front yard, a little boy and a girl, running through a sprinkler while their father washed his car in the driveway. A golden retriever barked happily and chased after them. It was a scene of simple, unpretentious joy. The house was no longer a monument to the Prestons' ego. It was just a home. Lily slowed the car to a crawl, and we just watched for a moment. I expected her to feel a pang of sadness, a ghost of a memory. But when I looked at her, she was smiling. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "It's just a house," she said, more to herself than to me. "It was never mine." None of it was. She put the car back in gear and drove away without looking back. We spent the rest of the day in the garden, my garden, the one David and I had planted together. We dug our hands into the rich soil, pulling weeds, preparing the beds for the summer flowers. We worked in comfortable silence for a long time, the sun warm on our backs. "He called me last night," Lily said finally, not looking up from the patch of earth she was tending. "From a blocked number." I stopped what I was doing, my heart giving a small, protective clench. "What did he want?" "The same thing he always wants," she said, sitting back on her heels. "He told me he was sorry. He told me he made a terrible mistake. He told me he still loved me." She paused, and then looked at me, her eyes clear and steady. "And you know what I realized, Mom? I don't care. The words don't mean anything anymore. It's like listening to static on the radio." She had done it. She had untangled her heart from his. The final thread had been snipped. "He asked me one last thing," she continued, a small, wry smile playing on her lips. "He asked if I could ever forgive him." "What did you say?" I asked, my voice quiet. I said, "Ryan, forgiveness is earned. But more than that, it's for people who are sorry for what they did, not for people who are just sorry about how it turned out for them." She took a deep breath. "And then I told him that my mother once told me that some lessons have to be learned in the cold. I hope you've learned yours." Then she hung up. And she blocked the number. That was it. That was the victory. It wasn't the eviction notice. It wasn't the legal papers. It was my daughter, on her knees in the dirt, planting new life, completely and utterly free. She was strong, she was whole, and she was home. We finished our gardening, and that evening, we sat on the back porch, watching the sun set, drinking lemonade. The air grew cooler, but it was a pleasant, refreshing cool, not the biting, cruel cold of that December night. Lily was telling me about the book she was writing, her face animated, her voice full of passion. Her light, which had been so dimmed, was shining brightly once more. I thought about the promise Ryan had made at their wedding, to protect her, to be her shield. He had failed spectacularly. But in a way, he had inadvertently kept it. His cruelty, his weakness, his betrayal, they had forced her to learn how to protect herself. They had forced me to build a fortress around her, not of money or property, but of unconditional love and unwavering strength. He showed her what love wasn't, so now she would forever know what love is. He learned his lesson in the cold. And my daughter? She found her way back to the warmth. And for a mother, there is no revenge sweeter, and no triumph more profound, than that. The world is full of people like the Prestons. People who believe their wealth or their status makes them immune to the basic rules of human decency. They chip away at you with 1,000 tiny cuts until you forget who you are. The lesson here isn't just about revenge. It's about knowing your worth. It's about drawing a line in the snow and daring someone to cross it. And it's about remembering that the coldest nights often lead to the brightest dawns. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to teach someone a lesson they should have already known, let me know in the comments below. And for more stories about justice being served, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You never know when you'll need a reminder that sometimes, the quietest people have the firmest resolve.